Hello, everybody. We're so glad that you're here. Welcome, welcome. I'm going to encourage you to put your name and where you're from into the chat. And then you'll see there's a Q&A section. So we have a very special guest, Katie Fahey. So I'm going to encourage you, if you have questions for Katie, put them in the Q&A. And we're just really glad that you're here today. Big welcome. Folks are slowly coming in. I'm super excited to have this get together. For a long time, we have been focusing on signature collection, and on Friday, we're actually going to be certified for the ballot. That's when the ballot board meeting is. But it's been a long road, and it's wonderful that we have this opportunity to learn from our neighbors. So for folks who are just coming in, please add your name and where you're from. And a big welcome to the August 14th all volunteer Fair Districts Huddle. So big welcome. So we have hit 110 folks that are here. And since, time is of the essence, what we'll do is we'll get started. I'm going to encourage you, if you have questions for Katie, put them in the Q&A. And you can use the chat to talk to one another. Please put your name and where you're from into the chat. And it looks like just so many people from all over Ohio. I'm just so grateful that you're joining us here today. And with that, I'm going to ask us to go through the agenda. And so, Kelly, if you could move us along. So we're starting out with a welcome. Once again, I just wanted to say, just thank you to all of you. It's been a long road to collect enough signatures, and we are closer and closer to Election Day. At this point, we have just over 80 days away. So we should be having our eye on the prize and thinking about how is it that we're going to get out the vote? How do we talk to people about ending gerrymandering? And I thought, it's been such a long road. We need someone to come along and tell us about their fight and how their challenge addressing gerrymandering. And so we're going to hear from Katie Fahey, who is from the people. And I think the thing that I think is wonderful about Katie is she has a story about how it is that she came to fighting gerrymandering. And so do we. We all have a story. And we're going to ask her about things like clipboards, and some of the challenges that she had. And I highly encourage you to use the Q&A, so that we have all the questions together. Then we're going to talk about getting out the vote, ballot board, and upcoming events. And with that, I'd like to begin having a conversation with Katie Fahey. And Katie really, she doesn't necessarily need an introduction. Many of you will know her from the documentary Slay the Gerrymander. She's also somebody who, does this kind of amazing TED Talk about the power of volunteers. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Katie, and I am going to spotlight you, Katie. So you're spotlighted at this point, and we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Well, it's so nice to be with everybody tonight. I love that there's enough redistricting nerds to hang out on a Wednesday evening when you could be doing anything else in the summer. But this is really, really important. So just so excited and honored to be here. I'm happy to tell you guys a little bit about my journey and then happy to answer questions and talk about whatever would be most helpful. But just in general, just want to say thank you. There is such an important battle that you guys are right in the middle of. And I know from personal experience that this will not happen without, hundreds of people, if not thousands of people talking to one another, being willing to talk to their neighbors about how could politics look better here in Ohio. And so anyways, I didn't used to always hang out on Zoom calls like this at night. My background is actually in environmental business. So like sustainable business, like social oriented business practices, that kind of stuff. I started in the grocery industry, spent most of my days, in a suit, hopping in garbage cans, sorting out recycling across grocery stores across Michigan, and cared about politics, but I never really liked the back and forth of the us versus them. My dad was a veteran, and so we always kind of approached things from a nonpartisan perspective in our home. But I thought voting was important, but I also was frustrated. I felt like a lot of the decisions being made, particularly in Michigan, didn't line up with what the general public of Michigan wanted. And I had recently graduated college, and I had an hour-long commute to work every day. And on that hour-long commute to work, I started listening to like the local radio about Michigan politics. And I started just hearing about how the legislature kept passing all of these bills that would kind of insulate themselves from the will of the people, like where people couldn't overturn the bills. And most famously, there was one that led to the Flint water crisis. If everybody, you maybe can let me know in the chat if you're familiar with that. I don't want to go into too much detail, but basically, decision making rights were taken away from Flint, Michigan. The people of Michigan actually tried to overturn that, but the first thing that our newly instated legislature did was find a loophole to ignore the citizen veto and put that bill back into place. The person who got put in charge ends up making this decision to switch the water source of what water is going to Flint and ends up accidentally poisoning an entire city with lead. And because I was in the recycling industry randomly enough, since when you can't drink your water from your pipes, you have to do bottled water, which leads to a really big recycling and waste issue. So I happened to be in the back room of some of those conversations, and there was just finger pointing. Nobody was talking about how do we prevent the next Flint water crisis. Nobody was talking about how do we even really fix this. It was either blaming somebody else or trying to take credit. And I just kept feeling like, man, like, how is this America? Like, there are kids every single day going to school, not able to drink water, going home and they can't shower with their water. They can't use their water to cook dinner. Like, and nobody's actually trying to think about this long term. And also at the same time, it was back in 2016. So the 2016 election was going on. And what was interesting is I saw a lot of my friends and family who normally kind of stay out of politics too, for the very first time starting to pay attention. And when I started to listen to why, it was really around two people. It was around Bernie Sanders, who was running, and Donald Trump, who was running. And when I asked people why do you like them, they said, like, I feel like they're actually going to change something, that they're actually going to change the system of politics. I thought, that's interesting. But I saw that, yes, it's important to decide who you want to vote for president, but also if we really want to change the political system, like there are systemic things we can do right here. Because when I had been looking into that Flint water crisis question and thought, how is the first thing that a newly elected representative does is undo a law that the citizens just overwhelmingly voted to get rid of? Like, how does that make sense? That you would be in office, you'd just see like a mandate from the citizens that they want you in office, but they also got rid of this bill, and it's the first thing you do. And that's when I started realizing that there was a tie to gerrymandering, that our politicians weren't actually afraid of our votes. They felt insulated from the general election voter and felt like kind of no matter what they did, they were going to get reelected as long as they could win their primary election. And that's when I really thought, like, wow, until we fix that, until we get politicians who actually care about who they're representing and are listening to us and care about our opinions, I think we're going to just keep having a bunch of uphill battles, not only just about water, but about a lot of important things that folks care about. And so, I'm on social media, not sure if any of you guys are on. And I just have like a normal amount of friends for my age. I'm not an influencer or anything like that. But before I went on that hour-long commute to work one morning, I put on my Facebook, like, hey, I want to end gerrymandering in Michigan. If you want to help, let me know, smiley face. And I thought that maybe one or two people would respond, and maybe we would go and volunteer for an organization like Common Cause or like the League of Women Voters, and we'd see if like they knew how the heck to end gerrymandering. But I go on my commute, I start my day job. At lunchtime, I checked my social media, and it had blown up. There were so many people in the comments and sending me private messages saying, oh my gosh, I've cared about gerrymandering for so long. I'm so sick of it. I'm so glad you're doing something about it. Let me know how I could help. And it was really overwhelming. I was like, wow, actually, a ton of people know about this too and care, because my immediate friends and family, those folks I was hoping we could stop arguing about who we were voting for and like do this instead, none of them knew what gerrymandering was. So they, at first, anyways, didn't really care. But then this moment kind of sunk in where I was like, oh no, like there are now hundreds of people who think I know how the heck to end gerrymandering. I had no idea. Like I knew that it was bad, I know I didn't like it, but I was at the very beginning of this journey. I had no idea what to do, how to solve it, anything like that. And so I had kind of a decision to make of like, do I like delete this post and forget all of these people have responded because it's very overwhelming and scary? Or do we lean in and figure out as everyday citizens, can we actually do something about this really big issue that is so systemic and huge and powerful, holding us back? And as I started researching, I saw that there were a lot of other organizations who cared about this issue, but a lot of them were kind of shy to want to do something about it formally. They, had a lot of issues they were working on. And so we, as just random strangers on the internet, started organizing. I had no idea what a political campaign was. I made up what I thought different departments of a campaign would be. I was like, we probably need fundraising. We need like a legal department. We've got to like figure out how to gather a bunch of signatures. Oh, I forgot a step. I had Googled how do you end gerrymandering. And thankfully, this website called Ballotpedia exists that taught me about the citizen initiative and referendum process that only about half the states have. And thank goodness Michigan and Ohio actually have it. And when I read and looked that up, I saw that, okay, if we can write constitutional language, and then, which I had no idea how to do, not a lawyer, no idea, had never written a law in my life or really even read one. But okay, if we do that, then we just have to gather a bunch of signatures. In Michigan in 2018, for qualifying for the 2018 ballot, it was 315,654 registered Michigan voter signatures in 180 days. And I lived in the second largest city in Michigan. It's called Grand Rapids. I looked up our total population, like right as after I read that, and it was 200,000 people who live in our entire city. And I was like, oh, so even if I talk to every single person, they all say yes, they all sign my petition, we still won't be anywhere close to actually qualifying for the ballot. That's not overwhelming or terrifying, but okay, at least we've got a number we can work with. And then I saw that the third step was then you just have to get, the majority of people in your state to vote yes. And when I looked that up, I was like, oh, okay, 2.5 million people voting yes. Cool. I'll just call all of my friends and hope that they have, a couple 100,000 friends and we can do this. But the exciting thing I think that I saw was like so many of these really big issues, it feels like there's nothing you can do about it, like no matter how much you care. And at least we had a pathway. At least there was an option that if we could write the language, gather the signatures, get people to vote yes, we could actually amend the Constitution and bypass our corrupt as heck legislature to actually get a bill that would work to end this. And that's when I started learning about things like independent citizens, redistricting commissions, and all that. So I know I want to like get to questions and stuff, so I'll try to fast forward this part, but happy to dive into any details you guys want. But basically, a group of us online, we started researching and calling other states, including Ohio, actually, to see how they had been trying to tackle gerrymandering. Um, we put together best practices and we're like, okay, we think we've got a pretty good law that we like. But I kept having this feeling in the back of my head of like, we've only reached this many people. First of all, it's only people who are on Facebook. And there's a lot of people who aren't on Facebook. Also, like, nobody knows who we are because we started from a post like a couple weeks ago. So we made up this plan where, because I was reading about the citizen initiative process, and Michigan and Ohio's constitutions share some language around all political power being inherent in the people. And I had read that that's Article 1, Section 1 of the Michigan Constitution. I think it's maybe Section 2 for Ohio, but I need to look it back up. But anyways, all political power is inherent in the people. So I was like, okay, so I'm one of the people, and let's try to reach all the rest of the people. Let's truly try to make this for by and of the people of Michigan. So we came up with this plan. Michigan at the time had 14 congressional districts, and we thought, okay, let's at least visit each one twice, ideally more times, but like that still was a lot to do because we saw that we had about a month and a half to write language, and I still had a day job. And we came up with a presentation that talked about, probably one that many of you have given or attended, that talked about like, what the heck is gerrymandering? I went even back to like, what districts are we talking about? Like again, I knew what it was, but I was like, is this applied to the Senate? No, it doesn't. Like I had to figure out what districts, what does it look like in states that don't have politicians drawing the lines? And then like, what could it look like here? And then we designed it to have a conversation with people in communities with a survey attached to it, asking them like, what do you like? What would you think is actually solved? And do you like the current process better? Like if the majority of people said like, no, we like politicians drawing the lines, I actually think I would have quit then. because it's supposed to really be about the majority of people and what their will is. But what we ended up seeing when we started those town halls, it was standing room only, like in the middle of the UP, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, very rural. On the first day of the first snowstorm of the year, not a day most people drive, Saturday morning, we had 70 people in a town of 350 standing room only wanting to talk about this. None of them really knew what redistricting was, but they said it was the first time that anybody, including a politician or anyone, had ever actually came and asked them for their opinion on how a law should look. And the really beautiful part about your commission and our commission is that that's exactly what the redistricting commissions do too. They go to people and they actually ask them, what do you want representation to look like? And that is freaking powerful. It is so worth fighting for because people finally feel like they can have a say and like they can see that when they do show up, it does matter. They can get fair districts. So anyways, we saw that all across the state and we ended up holding 33 town halls in 33 days, a couple online, different language, all that kind of stuff. We had thousands, like 5,000 people give us input on how they wanted this law to be written. We write the law and we had to gather those signatures because we had gone around the state. We kind of had built-in natural infrastructure of people who are at least kind of interested and willing to talk to us again and see if they would be willing to pick up those clipboards. And so we ended up actually gathering over 440,000 signatures in only 110 days. We didn't need all 180. And what's really cool is we're like the only petition that's ever gathered signatures from all 83 counties of Michigan, which I'm very proud of because we wanted this to be for, by, and of the people. And to me, that was like a reflection of that. And then we knocked a bunch of doors. We knocked more doors than the governor did that year. We would not be stopping and trying to talk to people about what this would look like. And we ended up passing with over 61% on election day, which is really exciting. And then the last part before I stop blabbing and see what you guys really want to talk about is then we got to actually implement it. And that felt so far away back when I first made that Facebook post. I didn't even know what an independent commission was, but what it felt like the worst possible thing at the time because COVID happened and we had not designed our policy even thinking about a worldwide pandemic and what would that mean. And we were like, oh no, we need like people to apply to be on this commission in the middle of all of this other emergency stuff that's going on, and the census was delayed. It was a mess. But what was really cool is because we had taken so much time to have so many of those conversations with folks and that they knew what this was, we had just under 10,000 people who applied for our commission, which was really exciting. The commission went and traveled across the state. It was messy. It was policy making, but it was all out in the open. Most of our laws do not require even FOIA, which is crazy. So we actually got to watch all of the messiness of policy making, but those commissioners voted on a map. 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, 2 independents, actually more than that, but at least that many voted yes. And those maps got implemented, and the first election they were used in was 2022. And before redistricting, one party, the party that was gerrymandering, got 49% of the total state vote. And they ended up getting over 70% of the seats that they won with only 49% of the vote. So they basically had like a super majority, and they didn't even have to listen to the side that actually got 50% of the vote, which is kind of wild. And that had been that way for about 40 years. And in 2022, the very first election that these new maps were used in, 51% of the vote went to the party that hadn't been gerrymandering. 49% again went to the party that had been gerrymandering. 51% of the seats went to the party that got 51% of the vote. 49% of the seats went to the party that got 49% of the vote. We had an exact match for how people voted for the very first time in Michigan. It was amazing. There was like a 1 or 2 seat majority, which I was super excited about because it meant that every piece of legislation, especially moderates who had pretty much been erased because so many of the races had been happening in the primary where they were more extreme candidates, were like the most important people to make sure that the bills were reflective of. And almost every piece of legislation had bipartisan support, and issues that you had seen 70-80% of people of Michigan wanting to see common sense reforms made out of that had been stalled for 40 years finally started passing with bipartisan support. Like we had the first like just a really basic like gun safety law around like locking up your gun kind of thing, that again, people, there was like 80% of support. The business community had come out and been like, we should do at least this, and it passed super easily. And it was amazing to feel like, wow, we finally have a responsive government. And of course it's not done. We have to still stay involved. We have to still vote. We still have to talk to our politicians to make sure they know how we feel. But like all of the hard work that you guys are in the very middle of was so worth it. All of the nights where we were on Zoom calls like this instead of, watching Netflix or hanging outside on the porch or whatever, or hopefully you're on Zoom while outside if it's gorgeous like it is here today. But all of it was worth it. And what's really cool is because it's in the Constitution, it's not only right now, but I just had my first kid, a daughter, and she can't vote for 18 more years. But in 18 years, she will have fair districts from her very first election when I didn't get that. And it's only because thousands of people were willing to put in the time and energy to make it. And that's what you guys are doing too. And there's going to be millions of people who will now have fair districts because of all the hard work you're doing. So any way I can help or support, happy to, and happy to take any questions.
Well, once again, we're just, very grateful that you were able to join us today and talk with us. So, one of the things that always strikes me is a lot of us have put out Facebook posts or, Twitter, X or whatever. What is it that you think that made the difference? Was it, like it sounds
Yeah.
like you came to this with passion, but there was a part of me that's like, any one of us could come at this with passion. What do you think kind of the difference is?
I definitely think part of it was timing. It was kind of right after the 2016 election, and there were a lot of people who were fired up and looking for something to do. But I also think as we continued to grow, it was putting out why we thought this made a difference. So that wasn't like the initial Facebook post necessarily, but like even when we needed to, I had a bunch of student debt. Like we didn't have millions of dollars in the bank. So like we had to afford a lawyer. And I was like, okay, guys, there's like a couple hundred of us. Each of us need to find 10 friends to give $10. And we made personal videos, like, which was really kind of felt awkward in a way. I was not used to being on camera at all. But, hopped on and just thought about it and like wrote out and talked about like, and sometimes you feel like you should do it from a partisan lens. But what we continue to see from polling, but also just like talking to other human beings, is that like partisanship only gets you so far. Most people, they're really driven more by the values that they feel like our country stands for: fairness, not being discriminated against based on who you
Mhm.
vote for, like being able to have an accountable government, politicians who are listening to you. And so on that video, kind of asking people to donate money, which also felt like really, I was like, I've never asked anybody to donate money to anything before. But I just talked about like why I thought it would make a difference and tried to spell out those steps again. That's part of why I share it in that way, is like I hadn't really realized that we could actually solve this. And I think that's sometimes the bridge you have to help people with, is like they just look at politics as like this mess that will never change. And it's like, no, there are systemic things we can do to change, but like here's how these steps and why these steps are so important. And I think the clearer you can get at that, the better, more practice you can get talking to your neighbors, talking to your friends, putting stuff on social media to see how people react, what their questions are. Um, the better you'll be in general, because when this passes, you're going to have to keep doing that to talk to people about like why the heck they should care about an independent commission to show up for that kind of stuff too. So
Well, I always think, we're at the point where we have a shared vision of citizens, not politicians, and independent citizens redistricting commission. It's different than Michigan. So there are some things that we did differently, but
right.
right now we have a shared vision. And I think what when you're talking about getting all the people around you to think about, how do we have a shared vision for improving democracy?
Right.
And so I'm going to ask you the question, because we're in the middle of all this.
Yeah.
What part of the process was the most nerve-wracking?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think, at when we first started this, it was not the most nerve-wracking, surprisingly, but everybody told us it was impossible. Like all of those kind of established groups that were in Michigan fighting for this kind of said, like, look, people on the internet don't actually help mobilize anything. Like we were kind of like a new way of organizing that some of the
Mhm.
traditional groups are used to. And then all of the media, like the news media, they were like, you don't have your policy written yet. You don't have millions of dollars yet. Like nobody's ever gathered 400,000 signatures with all volunteers. Like that's impossible. Like you guys, and it was a lot of naysayers. So if anything, like I also was like, well, at least we're trying something. It felt like we've got to at least try. And even if we look silly, like the worst that happens is we're still stuck with the mess that we have right now. So at that part, like it was more like trying to prove something, I feel like.
Mhm.
But then we started being really successful. Then we were gathering those signatures. Like the first weekend we had, I think we gathered 50,000 signatures or something crazy because people are like so excited. There's a lot of pent up energy. Um, and and then we got to turning those signatures in, which was awesome. But then a lawsuit got filed against us. And if you looked at the courts in Michigan, we elect Supreme Court members. The only way you can run for office is if you run through a party primary. So, anyways, they're all partisan. And if you looked at just and then the news story comes out basically saying that like two of the folks who are up for election were getting threatened that if they don't vote along party lines that they're not going to be endorsed by the party and not be able to run or whatever. So it all felt like that part when I had to leave it up to seven Supreme Court justices, where five of them were Republicans who were the party that were gerrymandering and two were Democrats. Like everybody told us like there's no way, and my lawyer had talked to us and kind of said like I think there's less than a 50%. And that was the part that I think was the hardest because it's like you can't do anything about it. Not really, anyways. We ended up showing up. Like the thing we did do is we packed the court. One of the justices afterwards told me the only day that the Michigan Supreme Court had ever been filled with every single seat that session was the day they heard the Voters Not Politicians case. And then we had 300 people outside because we all couldn't fit inside. And we were being really respectful, but we just wanted to show like these are real people who are trying to use our constitution. And we just want to be able to vote on this. So I think that for me, and if you watch Slay the Dragon, that's kind of like the part where I'm not happy, where I'm crying a little bit. I think that was the hardest because it was just like we felt powerless. There was if the Supreme Court had knocked us down, wasn't anything.
So this is one of the questions I got in the chat, which is what messaging do you think was the most effective when you were talking with Michigan voters?
Yeah, I was actually just thinking maybe I'll send it to Catherine afterwards. We had this really good political ad that was like 30 seconds because I had to be on TV,
Mhm.
so you've got to keep it tight. But it really just explains like the current process and then like how it could look differently. And it everybody so how I would usually start stuff was like, are you frustrated with politics as usual? And like everybody, Democrat, Republican, independent, voter, not voter, everybody's like, yeah, politics sucks. Which maybe there's a better way to word that. But like everybody's like, no, I'm not happy with the state of politics. And they would point the finger and maybe blame one party or another. But universally, people in general did not think stuff that they didn't like it. And
Mhm.
so then I would say, like, okay, well, did you know there's actually something we can do about that? And there were a lot of eye rolls and a lot of like, yeah, sure there is. But then we would take our clipboards. And the back of our clipboard had the local district that I was like either canvassing or trying to circulate signatures in. And I would just say, like, well, your voting districts right now, do you think that this represents your community? And I would just show the visual. And people would, and it had the cities overlaid on it. And people would then just look at it and say, like, no, that doesn't make any sense. You know, like, why is Farmington and Farmington Hills in two completely different districts when they share a school district, a police department, and water sources? Like so many decisions are integrated. Why would you cut the community right in half like that? And I say, well, do you think, then I'd hop into like, well, politicians actually make these decisions, da da da. And the light bulb would go off very easily where they were like, yeah, of course I believe that that's corrupt and I can actually see it. And people still would remain pretty skeptical that you could actually do something to change it. But I think what mattered to them was the fact that we were volunteers and that we were really passionate about this and willing to talk to them about it. And so they were usually willing to give it a chance, take some literature, and ended up voting yes. But I really think just explaining it plainly and helping, remind people that voters should be choosing their politicians, not the other way around, is kind of the core message.
Well, this is another thing that like I am a redistricting reform warrior.
You are.
Started in the late 90s. And what is true is whichever political party is out of power is much more open to making it fairer. And so like one of the things that we always worry about is like, well, how do we reach out so that you get everybody, and whether it's the most liberal person or whether it's a conservative like can you tell us a little bit about how you attracted more conservatives, more moderates, how that process worked for you?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing was there's two ways I like wording it. So one is like putting the invitation out there Like you have to actually ask people to be a part of your coalition. You have to ask people to show up and come to a town hall or whatever the thing might be. And related to that is like you have to go to them too. One of the smartest things we did, and part of why I took some time to explain it, were those town halls. Was driving across the state and going to parts of the state where people are like, well, not enough people live there, so why would we go there? But the reality is, we see this not only in Michigan and Ohio, we see this across the entire country. Yes, one party and people who vote that way might be paying attention to what gerrymandering is more, but universally, Americans want a fair process, a fair, independent, transparent process that they can actually try and trust because so much of politics they feel like they can't. And if you give them the opportunity to learn about it, they're responsive. And I think that's we kept getting all this political advice like just go to Detroit, just go to Detroit, which is the largest city. We definitely needed to go to Detroit. It was huge. A lot of the population lives there. But if we had just done that, I think we wouldn't have won. Because a lot of people would have been left out of that process. And I actually have a slide that we can throw up now or I can throw up later, but that kind of
Oh, why don't you
so
throw your slide up now?
yeah. So in general, this first slide is if you see all of the communities that are green, those are the communities that at least voted 50% of the folks in the county voted for us or more. So the vast majority of the state did. And if you want to go to the next slide, so the majority of Michigan's population, just to help this make sense, lives in the Detroit area. So you don't have to get over 50% in every county to win. A lot of these counties are really rural and have small numbers of the population compared to a third of the population living in that Detroit area. But the map on the left, all of the counties in blue, this is the same election, 2018. Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who's our governor currently, she won 17 of the counties with over 50%. And then if you look on that map on the right, we won 66 counties. And why I like highlighting this is you can see where all of the red, the people who you would have thought, wouldn't want this to pass because their party was currently gerrymandering, didn't vote for the governor, but did vote for this. And again, why I think that happened is because we actually went to those communities and all the ones in yellow were literally like so close to passing. I will just say too, we really only had one county that we should have done a much better job in. Um, but going to those places, making sure we had volunteers who could talk about it, printing off maps that showed that every part of Michigan's gerrymandered, not just one part. A lot of people thought like, oh, just Detroit's gerrymandered. No, the Upper Peninsula is gerrymandered too. You put up that local map. I remember there's like a big bay city, it's called, and they were like, none of our district, there's not a single road that touches our community in any other part of the district. You couldn't even drive from one part of the district to ours because you'd have to go through the woods instead. And it just clicked for them like, oh, this doesn't make sense. It's been drawn this way on purpose. Thanks for throwing
So
up
we had a question about kind of the demographics here. So can you tell us a little like us looking at this, we don't have some of us know, but can you tell us like where the cities are? Are the cities generally the blue areas on the
Yes.
map here? Is that the best way to
Yeah.
understand it?
Yeah, like the Detroit area. Detroit's like where a third of the city lives. Lansing's our state capital, if you see that. And then up in the Upper Peninsula, where there's the dark blue, that's Marquette, which is where like a couple of the college towns are. So more of the places where you would traditionally be told that and that when you look at the demographics, more Democrat voters tend to be. So
Well, and clearly the manipulation of district lines affects us all. And look at your map. That must have been incredibly moving to win with
yeah.
in such a significant way.
And the cool part was because we had volunteers from across the state too, they could see that their door knocking made a difference. They were looking at like the percentages of counties that came in, and in one place I do remember we literally got over 50% with one vote. And that person said, went out last weekend and I know that I got at least one person who originally said no and now voted and said they told me they'd vote yes. And I think that's the other cool part about all of you guys being involved in this process too, is you will see the hard work that you put in pay off because it really isn't. What's nice about redistricting is it isn't an issue that a lot of people don't like, that they don't want to see. The vast majority of people want to. Usually, if they end up voting no, it's because they either don't know enough about it and they're like, I don't know if we should amend the Constitution on something I don't know about, or somebody's lied to them and tried to say, hey, this is somebody trying to pull the wool over your eyes or whatever that is, whatever kind of opposition you guys have. But it's very rarely that people actually just like that politicians are deciding who their voters are.
Well, I am interested in this, like one of the things, that, we're going to be facing fairly well funded opposition. And I guess the question I really had is, how did your legislature act? How did the powers that be react to your voters not politicians proposal? And, do you have any advice for us?
One of the ways that I knew we were successful after the maps passed, so the commission had drawn them. The Democrats and the Republicans both sued the independent commission. And I was like, that means we did it right. Because
Can you say that again?
The Democrats and Republicans both sued the commission afterwards.
Okay.
And I felt like that was actually an accomplishment because it was like nobody's happy, which means it was actually fair, and both parties feel like they didn't get a disproportionate advantage, which was the whole point, is that no party should have a disproportionate advantage. But during the campaign, it was a little bit different. What was interesting is because we were able to show that we had so many volunteers across the state, neither party really wanted to be too vocally against it. Now they still were. They still ended up passing out literature and helping raise money. The actual politicians didn't end up saying, but there'd be one or two. If anything, there were a couple that we tried to make sure were out there in like bipartisan support when they were willing to come out together, and that they were both in support of the idea. Our main opposition came from the state chamber of commerce, which and from a group called like the group. If anybody's familiar with the Boss family,
So it's funny. All of a sudden I was having trouble hearing you, which I don't know
okay.
if other folks are having the same
Oh,
issue.
sorry.
So no, not to worry. Were you? So it sounded like you were saying that the Chamber of Commerce was opposed to your measure.
Yeah, the statewide chamber of commerce was they because if folks are familiar with the DeVos family, Betsy DeVos was like the Secretary of Education, but they're from Michigan and they have given a lot of money to Michigan politics over the years, and some of their consultants were the ones who drew the redistricting maps. So you might think that they have some stake. They have a lot of money in wanting to keep the system as it is, where they have a lot of control. And so on the state chamber of commerce, there's a lot of ties, I will just say. But what was funny is a lot of the local chambers of commerce, like the city level ones, all endorsed it, were super supportive. They wanted to see this pass. State chamber ended up being kind of our largest opposition. And what's funny is once we then started calling that out, like there was a Represent Us took out some newspaper ads saying and listing like the people who are CEOs of companies in Michigan who are on the Chamber of Commerce board. They actually had no idea that that was happening. It was more the political arm of that. So they removed their like all of their lawsuit, all of their advertising against it as soon as we actually just shone some light on the folks who were trying to do it. Because they realized that it was really unpopular, and they didn't like that we had shown the light on that, but it was effective. So I highly recommend that too, and trying to show where those interests may lie.
Well, I am a big fan of transparency. So now this is the other thing, we've had some questions because people kind of watch the lawsuits in Michigan. Um,
Yeah.
and one, I don't know if you know, with Ohio's process, we went through lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit with the elected officials, essentially continuing to draw gerrymandered maps. And so I just wondered, how quickly it was resolved. If you had any thoughts about that process.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So part of why I loved putting this in the Constitution and having really clear criteria for how the maps needed to be drawn and how the process needed to be implemented, our whole point the whole time was if anything is going on that shouldn't or is like a misinterpretation or whatever, we will finally have transparency and an easy way to bring a lawsuit to get accountability. Because it will be black and white in the Constitution, where previously any kind of redistricting stuff was just the law and basically very gray and fuzzy. So any lawsuits that were brought were usually unsuccessful because there just wasn't a lot of like teeth in there. By putting it in the Constitution, it really made it again black and white. And so our whole thought the whole time was like, that should be what happens if something happens that shouldn't be happening. I use the word happen. And so the commission, had a lawsuit from the Democrats and a lawsuit from the Republicans that were initially all dismissed. And then they got, some advice from a redistricting expert that I think a lot of us in the redistricting field actually we had thought was kind of like good advice or the advice you would take.
Mhm,
That ended up being, I guess, it ended up being ruled that it was bad advice, basically.
mhm.
But what was nice is that that lawsuit was brought, it got put into court. It's messy to see how the commissioners responding and all that kind of stuff. There was a little bit of infighting, but we got to see it all. And previously,
Mhm.
all of this was happening behind closed doors. How lines were drawn, why a certain district ended up looking the way it did. Nobody had the answers to that because it was a couple consultants in a room who would only let in politicians one at a time and then send them out of the room. And it was take, and really you could only try and bring a lawsuit on racial gerrymandering, nothing about whether the rules were followed or not. And this meant like, okay, they felt like a rule was violated. The courts decided that it was. The redistricting commission, we made it really clear in our law that any changes needed to go back to that redistricting commission. We did not want any politicians with their finger on the scale being able to try and draw these. And they drew
Katie,
the new map.
closer.
And they drew the new map.
Closer. I think we're all having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can hear
You
you
can
now.
see my
Sorry.
pores
We're
too,
like one
right?
of those old commercials.
Yeah, sorry about that. So anyways, the new maps were then redrawn after the lawsuit and they've been implemented and we just used them in our most recent primary election. So it all happened very quickly, happened in time to be ready for the next primary election. And I think we're all, you know, happy that that process happened in the way that it did in a transparent way.
All right. Well, we are close to a quarter to, and so I guess, one of the things that I wondered about, just to wrap us up, had to do with, what is the project that you're working on now and what is the people all about?
Yes. So when we were first starting Voters Not Politicians, we were starting at creating everything from scratch because we had just started on a Facebook post. So like a database. And we also wanted to be nonpartisan. And a lot of the tools that we saw were partisan. They were built kind of for parties to use. And it felt like, we've got volunteers across the spectrum. Like, let's build stuff from scratch. And like I said, nobody would really help us in the beginning either. Everybody was like, you're just a group of regular citizens. You don't do this for your day job. Like we're not going to waste our time.
Mhm.
And it really stuck with me. Because it's already really hard, as you guys know, to talk about redistricting and get people to care. On top of then having to figure out like how do we do all of these steps in the right way so that we can stay in the compliance and make sure that we don't screw anything up on how we're trying to pass. And so and also because it started with a Facebook post, we got a lot of press because it makes a snappy headline saying like, hey, this started with a Facebook post. So there were all these people reaching out to us from across the country who said, I really want to do this in my state, whether it was redistricting or this guy in New Mexico was like, I've always wanted to run as an independent candidate. I never have because I felt like it was impossible. But if you can get a bunch of people that care about gerrymandering, like I feel like I could get some people to believe in an independent candidate. So, anyways, all these people reached out and they were all asking for help. And at the time, I was like, well, we haven't even been successful yet. So I don't think I can help you because I'm not sure if what we're doing is right or helpful. After we won and started implementing the policy, it really felt like how do we take the tools and the lessons we learned and pay it forward? Hopefully
Mhm.
make it that much easier for the next group of citizens who are trying to change whatever, as long as it's like good governance and nonpartisan. How do we help make it easier for them to take that step? And so the people is really focused on passing along those tools, the relationships we made, and also finding what are those ways that we can help with like providing guidance or even on like the ballot initiative front, how not all states have that. In Ohio, last election cycle, as I'm sure all of you guys know, had an attack against the ballot initiative process, trying to make it harder for citizens to use that process. We've created a group where we've got folks from across the country who are actually fighting to strengthen and protect that process. And so we work on a lot of projects like that. We just held a citizen assembly if folks are familiar with that concept in New Hampshire, which doesn't have a ballot initiative process. So we brought together a representative group of citizens to show the legislature, hey, there's a bunch of people reflective of the state demographically that care and that want us to do something about actually redistricting, looking at the primaries, all the kind of good stuff that I know Common Cause fights for too. So we do kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of that, but really trying to
Mhm.
help folks in all 50 states. We've got volunteers in all 50 states and love figuring out however we can help. So we're here to help you guys in whatever way too that you need for us to finish
Well,
line and also to get it implemented after it passes.
Well, we just wanted to say thank you. We appreciate your talking with us. I know everybody, I did not get to every question. And so my apologies on that. I know Katie has lots of things to say, and we're just grateful that you joined us for a while and walked us through the process. And with that, we'll bid you adieu. And thank you so much. I just really, really appreciate it.
Yes, no problem. Thank you guys so much for having me. And I forgot to mention this back in 2018, Ohio was trying to work on redistricting then too. And we actually had that Wolverines and Buckeyes agree that voters should draw their lines, not politicians. And anyways, spirit
Yes,
is still
yes.
alive and well here.
Oh, the dogs and cats. We had the dogs and cats and Wolverines and Buckeyes.
Yes, I
It was
love it.
really fun. It was really fun.
It was. All right, guys, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you. So the one thing that I wanted to highlight to you all is that our proposal is different from Michigan's, and the ways to think about it being different is that, for example, Michigan essentially did their process of selection like you might a jury selection, where we have a process of vetting where retired judges go through interviews and public interviews of folks that want to serve on the commission. The other things, and part of this was, to ensure, expertise, to ensure people that were really focused on community, that were leaders in the community. And it really gives an opportunity for all of us to get to know who might be serving on that commission in advance. The other thing that is different is that the Voting Rights Act is very explicitly in the Ohio Citizens Not Politicians Amendment. And then additionally, any kind of consultant is required to have expertise in the Voting Rights Act. So I just wanted to be super clear that there are differences. And, as we think about kind of how inspiring she is, but we also need to be aware that the amendment itself is different. And with that, it's time to talk about Friday. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. First, I did want to say that was very inspiring, Katie's story. I'm it was great. It was great to hear from her. And I'm familiar with Katie's work, but it was funny because we were doing introductions, and Tiffany was like, "Oh, I feel starstruck. There's a movie star," and I'm like, "Katie, what movie were you in?" Like Slay the Dragon. I'm like, "Oh yeah, like duh." Like I'm not a big movie buff. I'm sorry. I don't watch a lot of TV. I felt horrible, but yes, I know there's a lot of questions about, when are we getting the issue number, ballot language. Well, here we go. Friday, August 16th. You're welcome to join us, 11 a.m., North Hearing Room of the Senate building. The easiest way is just to enter from 3rd Street right there and go right up the stairs. 2 flights. And you can watch at the Ohio channel. There's a link. It'll be shown live. Oh,
Trevor, you're on mute. I don't know how you muted yourself, but you did.
oh, I'm sorry. I don't know how I did that either. I meant to put something in the chat there. The CMP, put out like the language we would like to see as on the ballot in November. And Jesse Ballmer published that. We'll see how closely it resembles that. But Catherine will be there, I believe. I'll be there. And anyone who can make it, it'll be fun with our good friends Frank LaRose, Teresa Gavarone, the whole star-studded lineup there. So and then issue numbers should be, as soon as they get that ballot language set Friday, we'll get an issue number and we'll get yard signs out as soon as we can after that. I know yard signs questions about yard signs are coming. We're working out a distribution system. We'll get yard signs out to everyone as soon as the campaign gets them printed and gets them to us. So yeah, thanks. I'll see you on Friday.
Party at the State House on Friday. Thanks, Trevor. So just a few things. I know we are pretty short on time, but wanted to talk a little bit about communication. So I'm just going to run through some things that you can do to help spread the word. So we want to make sure that every Ohioan knows about the amendment and that they need to vote yes. We expect that Friday it will be, issue 1. So we will be saying vote yes on issue 1. So a couple things you can do. You can join the Speakers Bureau. You can help us get gigs for the Speakers Bureau. So if you're not really down to presenting yourself, you can still help in that way. You can do things like tabling at community events. You can distribute literature and commit to vote cards. You can help get endorsements from local businesses and organizations. You can write letters to the editor, and more on that in a moment. You can share these messages on social media. You can connect with people at universities and colleges. You can plan educational events. And I wanted to make sure, I know that this is a question we often get. Yes, we promise that we will share links to everything that we're talking about in our follow-up email tomorrow. And if there's anything that we forget, please just reach out to us and let us know. For community events that you are planning, or if you have ideas about them, please reach out to Trevor, Heather, or CJ. And then for any media or presentations or events that feature the Citizens Not Politicians campaign, please reach out to me. And again, we'll put all of our contact info. I bet it's going to be in the chat any moment now, but we'll definitely put it in our follow-up email tomorrow. And then thank you for that. Next slide. So some messaging. Oh, sorry, go back a second. Some messaging resources. So really quick, there is the Citizens Not Politician video that came out about a month ago or so. This is a super useful and persuasive explainer. It's about 66 seconds and worth every second that you experience with it. It's a great thing to share in your channels and networks as well. We also have our Fair Districts Ohio toolkit, and this also has lots of resources. So top line messaging, some basic letters to the editor tips, graphics you can use in your social media, and more. And there's also an FAQ about the amendment. And I find this to be enormously helpful just in my own day-to-day. It's helpful in answering questions, but almost more importantly, it's super helpful in understanding the amendment yourself. It really explains things in ways that are very accessible to us average bears. And now you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Next Thursday at 6, we are going to be hosting a Letters to the Editor training. We know that Ohioans are overwhelmingly in support of fair maps, but we also know that not everyone is aware that they have the opportunity to end gerrymandering in Ohio this fall. So this is where you come in. We want to kind of harness the collective knowledge and experience that folks in the Fair Districts team have to just help you kind of channel your support into the Citizens Not Politicians Amendment. And writing a letter to the editor is, maybe some people feel like it's old school, but it really is an extremely useful and effective and persuasive way to get the word out about the Citizens Not Politicians Amendment, and we can help you write a good one. It's effective because it shows that people care about it, number one. So it's putting it out there, it's creating visibility, and it's extending the reach. So it's helping to expand the messaging that the campaign maybe can't do on their own. And it helps kind of, we're all about to be inundated with so many campaign ads. Like, I'm exhausted thinking about the commercials and that, and like every 2 seconds on every single platform that you are on, but all of those commercials and ads and sort of professionalized messaging, we tune them out, right? And so what we don't tune out is personal messaging. So when people write letters to the editor, it kind of cuts through all that noise, and it helps people connect issues in their own life with what they're seeing in the Citizens Not Politicians campaigning. So kind of in the same way that the videos that Katie talked about earlier kind of help cut through that noise, using your voice really makes a big difference. And so we want to give you some tools to do that. So I hope that you will join us next Thursday. And again, all the links to all of the things will be in our follow-up letter tomorrow. Old school, indeed.
Okay. So as for August events, we have the volunteer happy hour at Jackie O's Tap Room in Athens on August 15th at 4. And then on August 20th at 6:30, we have a discussion on gerrymandering with the retired Chief Justice O'Connor at the Dayton Metro. I will definitely be there. I'm sure to be a great evening. And then, as Elizabeth mentioned, we have the letter to the editor training on the 22nd. And then we have a discussion of the amendment in Upper Arlington Public Library in the Friends Theater on the 28th at 6. So that's all the upcoming events for this month. And then next month, we have People Power, Let's End Gerrymandering at the Community Forum at Christchurch Cathedral in Cincinnati on the 5th. And then on September 12th at 7, we have Gerrymandering 101. What is gerrymandering? How do we fix it? At the Rocky River Civic Center Memorial Hall. And then on the 26th at 7, we meet the author of Anti-Democratic and Rat Fucked, Dave Daly, who I believe we've had on a previous huddle at the Women's Pavilion in Lakewood Park in Lakewood.
Some more ways that you can support Fair Maps. If you haven't yet already signed up, please go to that link and sign up to volunteer. We will match you up with a leader in your area. Follow Fair Districts Ohio on social media, and please share that content so that we can boost our messaging. If you are interested in booking a speaker for an event, as Elizabeth talked about before, you can do our request a speaker form so we can get someone to come talk to your group about gerrymandering and the amendment. Also, take a look at our toolkit. It has a lot of information that's very helpful as we are out talking to voters. And then please join us for our next huddle, which will be on September 11th at 6 p.m. And
Well,
Catherine?
I was going to say, we have come to the end of our program. So just so you all know, we will send you a follow-up email with the slides and with a recording. I just wanted once again to do, a big thank you to Katie for joining us. And I know we didn't get to everybody's questions, and I know this format can be a little challenging. It would be nice to all be together in a room or to do our meetings. But unfortunately, this is where we're at because of the Zoom bombing. So I know that this is a little bit harder to navigate, but I'm just so grateful that so many of you were able to join us. A big thank you. And our next step is really to get the word out. I hope that I will see many of you on Friday at the Ohio Ballot Board meeting. I'm looking forward to being issue number 1. And Trevor, Elizabeth, anybody want to add anything before we bid everyone adieu?
Oh yes, the following day after Friday, we're hitting the streets. Canvassing is up on Mobilize, mobilize.us/citizens not politicians. We've got canvassing events in Cincinnati, Columbus, Akron, and Cleveland. We'll have a bunch more coming up. If you've got events, we'll put them up on Mobilize. If you want to canvass, if you want to do things, talk to us, sign up to volunteer. But hope to see you Saturday as well, out on the streets. Yes, on issue 1.
And I was going to tell you, I'm bringing a bunch of buttons and some t-shirts to the ballot board. So I want you to feel like you can join us and get your garb so you'll be ready to go out and do a little bit of canvassing on Saturday. Elizabeth, anything you wanted to add?
We're number one. We're number
We
the most
are number
most
one.
sportsy you guys will ever see me be. And just remember what an incredible, important role that all of you have in getting the word out about all of this. You are our most valuable resource, honestly. And so everything that you're doing is wonderful. If you have questions, ideas, suggestions, please reach out to us and we will keep communicating about future opportunities. So the door knocking, possible postcard parties, text campaigns, all of those things, we will keep talking about it. So just keep following us. And again, feel free to reach out for specific questions. Thank you, everyone.
And I just shared my my email because I realized there are lots of things I didn't get to, and folks even have their hands up. So please send an email to cturser@comcause.org and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Well, everybody have a really good evening, and a big thank you to you all for all the hard work, and I hope to see you Friday. Thanks. Bye.